Okay, so it's my first official video talking about homeschool on this channel, and I think it would be appropriate to jump into the big question that most parents are going to be having. Should I homeschool my kid? It's not an easy decision to make, regardless of whether you think that you should or you have reasons to believe that you shouldn't. Because the fact of the matter is that it's not as simple as homeschooling is better or homeschooling is worse or public school is better or public schooling is worse. It's about whether you're going to actually be in a position to provide that kind of an educational environment for your child at home. So we're going to go over a few things that you definitely need to consider if you want to homeschool before you make your decision. So the first big hurdle to cross over if you're going to decide to homeschool is what the regulations and requirements are in your particular state of residence for homeschooling. So for me, I live in Texas. And what that means is that there are a few requirements that I have to teach in the way of subject matter, but beyond that, I make the decision when to do it, I make the decision how to do it, I make the decision how long to do it, and that's about it. There's no one I have to report to. I don't have to have actual grades submitted at the end of a semester or anything like that. It's all on me. I am considered a private school, and what that means in Texas is that it's almost like the Wild Wild West. Anything goes. Now, that can be a good or a bad thing, because when you don't have someone that's actually holding you accountable for the way that you're educating your kids, there isn't really any sort of a way of measuring whether you're doing effective learning or not. So the way that I checked that information was I went to a website called hslda.org, and that is a website that has the rules and regulations for each state individually for doing homeschool. It lets you know if there are any required curriculums. It lets you know if you need to be certified as a teacher, if you have to have vaccinations for your children or not, if you're going to do it, and what organization you may need to report to if you do the homeschooling at home. So that will mean, more likely than not, that you will have to have a full-blown written curriculum with assignments and grades so that you can report to them and let them know how your child is doing. So of course, knowing how and if you can do homeschooling is only one of the hurdles. Now, it's a big one, that's to be certain. Knowing how you can and cannot be allowed to homeschool your student at home is very important. But it's not the only piece of the puzzle, because the other thing you have to think about is it feasible? And when I say that, it means very simply, will you be able to have the time to be present for your child at home to assist them with their learning? You have to understand, homeschooling isn't exactly how it was when we were in the pandemic, where they're just automatically connected with someone online. They sit, they do their learning in their video sessions, and then they go on about their day. Depending on where you live, you may have to do that. Depending on where you live, you may have the option of doing that. But the reality is that you may not want to do that. You may not want to just put them in another environment of just sitting down, absorbing a bunch of information and expecting to regurgitate it again. You may want something that's more hands-on. You may want something that's a little more adapted to what their individual needs are, which means that you're gonna have the time to be present for it, or at the very least, be able to have someone that can help you with that. It's not going to be as hands-off as school tends to be when they go to a regular public school or anything like that. So if you have a work schedule that has you away from home a lot of the time, that's not going to allow you to remotely work or even shift to a different line of work if it's necessary, it may not be feasible to do homeschool. If you are in the middle of educating yourself so that you can move on to a new career field, and that requires the bulk of your time, that could be a liminal space where maybe you can and maybe you can't. Maybe you find yourself giving your child more educational time than you are giving yourself, and you're putting yourself back. You have to think about all of these things. You may have to think about it from a child care standpoint. If you don't have someone that they can reliably and comfortably stay with so that they can learn, is it going to be fair to them to have them homeschool and not necessarily know whether they're going to be at home or at a relative's house, or maybe even having to accompany you to work in order to do their school? These are all factors that are very important because it doesn't just affect you, it affects your child too. Think about the summertime. Summertime, your food cost goes way up, right? You end up spending $200, $300, $400 more on groceries depending on how many children you have. Imagine that being your new normal. You're having to feed them in the morning, at lunchtime, and at dinner time, all 7 days of the week, instead of having 2 of those meals provided for them at school. And if you're able to afford daycare, they're pretty much set up until dinner time, Monday through Friday. And then you only have to worry about Saturday and Sunday and the holidays. All of a sudden, you're having to do that every single day. Is that something that you're able to afford? I know it's not a fun conversation to have, but it's a realistic one. It also means you have to spend time preparing all of that food. Are you going to have the time to make 7 days worth of breakfast, 7 days worth of lunches, and 7 dinners? Whether you have help in the household or if it's just you, these are things that you really have to think about before you make the decision. Lastly, but definitely not the least important, is your child's individual needs. So, perfect example. I have a child that has ADHD and autism, and that means that they learn very differently, not just compared to their other classmates, but also compared to their brother, which means that I can't just give them a one-size-fits-all education. That means that I have to make accommodations. I'm having to take extra time on certain subjects with them. I'm having to explain things at a slower pace. I'm having to make sure that all the resources that might have already been provided in the school are provided to them here at home. Now, that may actually seem like a good thing for you, like it was for us, because I was finding that what was supposed to be provided to them in school wasn't. The time that they needed to take slower steps moving forward in certain subjects and then rush forward in the other ones that they're doing well in wasn't provided. They had to go, for the most part, at the same pace as the rest of their peers. Only in some instances were they able to take a little more time to go over certain concepts, because after a certain point, they had to keep up with the rest of the class or risk getting held back. And if that's something that you find your children going through, it might be a good idea to consider homeschooling them if all of the other factors line up. Because the good thing about homeschool, even if you do have to follow certain curriculums based on wherever you live, is that you are afforded that freedom. If you have a student that needs more space to learn, to deal with whatever movements that they need or additional resources they need, you can set up a space for that at home. If they need accelerated learning because they're learning things so fast that they can't keep up with everybody else and they're actually being held back, you can provide that. If they want to learn additional subjects that, for whatever reason, are blocked for their grade until they reach a certain one, but they're interested now, you can provide them with those resources. There is so much more that you can do as a homeschooling parent than you can as a parent with their child in public school or just traditional school away from home. You hold the control, as much as the rules and regulations in your area allow you to, of course. But even then, supplementing what's required is still much more possible when you're homeschooling than if you're just going into the habit of sending them off to school and expecting everything to be provided there. So, you've been given a lot of information. So, now that you know what to start thinking about, it then comes to the real question. When do you decide should your child homeschool or not? Do you have to wait until a new school year starts? Can you do it whenever you want? Do you need to make arrangements at your work first? Again, it's ultimately up to you and up to whatever the rules and regulations in your state are. Living in a low regulation state, I was able to make that decision at my own leisure. I ended up deciding to take the summer to think about it between school years. And at the beginning of last school year, I jumped off of the plane and decided, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to see if it's feasible. If it's not, the good thing is you usually have the ability to put your child back into school, whether it's temporarily or consistently moving forward. But if it's something where you have to have certain things done before you can actually take your child and homeschool them, you have to make sure you understand that from a legal standpoint so that you follow those rules. But I also want you to understand that you don't want to just homeschool haphazardly. You don't want to go through the process of homeschooling your child, not really give it the full honest effort that it needs to be, so that way you can truly decide whether it's a good choice or not. Only the give up part of the way because you think it's not working out. You really do have to take your time and really come to a consensus, whether it's with other parents, other guardians, your child, yourself, of course, and whoever may be helping you to take care of your children, and certainly your job, whether you should go forward with this or not, and how you're going to go forward with this. So don't rush into it. Don't feel like just because you're upset with how things are going, or you're frustrated with what's happening with your child at school, or they're frustrated with school, that you have to immediately switch to homeschooling. It is so much better with your child to make sure everything is well thought out and done with patience and consideration instead of rushing through it. So I hope this video helps you at least figure out what are the things you need to think about before you make your decision, so that way you can make as informed a one that you can make for yourself. Remember, one size fits all does not apply to learning, and it doesn't apply to homeschooling either. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'm looking forward to giving you more content in the future. If you have any questions that you'd like me to address in future videos, go ahead and leave a comment below. I'll do my best to do a video about them. Take care.